even if half the people or 9 out of 10 people are having a negative reaction, that means that one is having a positive reaction. And one positive reaction is better than 100 meh reactions. Perfection is achieved when there is nothing left to subtract. Give your brain permission to have bad ideas, because then you just bash them out. You bash out hundreds of ideas, and maybe 5 of them will actually have some value. You have to have the bad ideas to have the good ideas. Curiosity is so important, because when you're working in marketing, whether you're writing or marketing or whatever, a lot of the time, it would be easy to write off what you're talking about as boring. And as soon as you do that, you've lost. You're not going to write anything good. But if you delve into it, really go deep and learn about it, there's always something interesting in there.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. Yes, it is a pretty different setting right now. You'll get used to this because we have another episode coming out in a couple of weeks right at the end of the year that is all about 2025 predictions, recapping 2024, and it's me, Mark, Yama Shimshek, Arnaut Helmans, and Begum Kaya as well. They'll be here. It will look lovely. We're all beautiful and basically a second studio here at the Candour offices to record a very special episode, like I said. But on this week's episode, I am joined by the one and only Will Slater. Will and I get very, very nerdy, talking all about storytelling and how understanding stories, reading more fiction, even writing fiction, can help you write better content for your clients and for your sites. Will did a brilliant talk of Brighton SEO earlier this year, all about the Princess Bride, and he has some fantastic references and recommendations throughout the episode that I think you'll hugely enjoy if you're looking to improve your writing style in 2024, and as we head towards 2025 as well. But before I get to my conversation with Will, here is a word from our sponsors for this week. A huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring this week's episode of Search with Candour. SE Ranking is the company behind the powerful and intuitive SEO platform trusted by millions of agencies, businesses, and SEO professionals since 2013. With a robust toolkit, SE Ranking empowers SEO professionals around the world to excel at executing their strategies. Key features include the Rank Tracker, which provides accurate and up-to-date keyword rankings, as well as the competitive and keyword research tools that offer deep insights into market trends and competitor strategies. The platform's AI-powered SEO insights leverage advanced machine learning to deliver actionable recommendations, streamlining the process and letting you outrank your competition. The Backlink Checker and Monitoring tool enables you to analyze backlink profiles and monitor their status, ensuring you've got a very healthy link building strategy. SE Ranking have launched their AI Overviews tracking feature. It's a brand new tool that allows you to track AI search engine snippets that will help you see how you stack up against your competitors in Google's AI enhanced search features. The tool supports you in identifying your rivals in the snippets, analyzing their content, and detecting new opportunities for strategic decisions. Click the link in the video description down below or in the show notes if you're listening to this episode. And a huge thank you to SE Ranking for sponsoring us here at Search with Candour. Optimizer is the modern PPC management software that is built by PPC people for PPC people. Optimizer contains everything you need to create, optimize, and automate high-performing paid campaigns across multiple platforms. As I just mentioned, we're going across platforms, and I think this is one of the best time-saving options and features when it comes to Optimizer. If you are advertising across multiple platforms, including Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, then you need to be using these cross-platform tools. You can create reports, you can create shareable dashboards, you can share budgets and alerts across all of these platforms. If you are individually managing each of these things, you could save yourself a lot of time by using Optimizer's cross-platform tools. For monitoring, the alerts let you know when budgets have been exhausted or KPIs have been reached or missed. And when it comes to the rule engine, this allows you to set up custom rules to automate so many time-consuming and manual tasks that are part of your paid campaigns. You can easily automate rules. Basically, if you can write your strategy or tactic down, you can automate it. It's that simple. This can be especially helpful in things like e-commerce when it comes to stopping overspending of a particular ad. This is something I know from personal experience. I have had an ad that has overspent, and if I had used Optimizer, that would have saved my budget and saved my campaign in that instance, and I wish I'd used Optimizer at the time. You can also adjust bids and choose which products or ads are showing based on things like the weather and pretty much anything else you can put into a spreadsheet. It is fully customizable and automated, so you can choose when ads start and which products are showing depending on the time of year, depending on the weather, and so many other factors. It's all automated and makes the process so much easier. To sum it up, Optimizer is the award-winning all-in-one PPC toolkit that makes managing paid search easier, faster, and less prone to error. It puts you back in the control of your campaigns by allowing you to create and deploy your own automations across multiple ad platforms. You can start your 14-day free trial by going to optimizer.com. That's optmyzr.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And if you want to see Optimizer in action, you can book a personalized demo with one of Optimizer's experts by clicking the link in the show notes as well. So you can get a 14-day trial or book a demo at no cost to you. Like I said, go and click the link in the show notes or the video description down below. And a huge thank you to Optimizer for sponsoring Search with Candour. My guest this week is the creative content specialist at 43 Clicks North. They are a Brighton SEO speaker who has talked about both The Princess Bride and The Gruffalo in public speaking. They are a writer, a photographer, and I know from first-hand experience just how fast they can run to get a train home. Welcome to the show, Will Slater.
Thank you very much.
I hinted at it there, but you and I had a lovely bonding experience of chaos on trains on the way back from Brighton earlier this year.
We did. There's nothing like being terrified of being stranded in an unknown place to make a bond between people, is there?
Exactly. There was a typical British train experience, shall we say? Oh, this one's cancelled. You made it 2 more stops, and this one's cancelled. Like, okay.
Yeah. Everyone's scrolling through their phones trying to figure out which train we should be on to try and get somewhere near where we wanted to be.
Exactly. And with former guest of the show, Joe O'Reilly, as well, just frantically trying to work it out. And we're all heading in different directions. You're heading up north, I'm heading east, and Joe's heading off the other direction. It was all chaos all the time. But thankfully, we all made it home. And a matter of weeks later, about a month later, you and I are reunited on the podcast. And
we are.
It's a really interesting topic. It's something we've kind of touched on a little bit before. I know before we started recording, you mentioned the episode with Julia Panozzo that I did a few weeks ago, where we were talking about the psychology and the neuroscience behind all of the marketing and all that kind of stuff, and how our brain works when it comes to processing marketing, and how we as marketers need to think about this kind of stuff and have that in the forefront of our minds. And it's a nice little connection, and it may not seem like an obvious connection, but I think we made it in the pre-show chat. We're going to be talking about storytelling and how that should be integrated into your copywriting. And I know this is something you have a lot of experience. Well, I mentioned a couple of your talks based on The Princess Bride and The Gruffalo being great examples of storytelling and combining that with the lessons you can kind of take away for content creating, content writing, and how that all relates to marketing and SEO. So I guess to open the conversation, why do you think storytelling is so relevant to copywriting these days?
I think the biggest thing is it's a brilliant way to build an emotional connection with the person you're speaking to. Whether you're writing or speaking or anything, marketing is, or can be, if it's done well, it's about creating an emotional connection with your customer, client, whatever. We can talk about logic and reasoning and giving people all the information they need to make a decision. But 9 times out of 10, and I'm being very scientific here, I am not clever like Julia, that emotional connection, getting someone really engaged and kind of, well, emotionally involved, I guess, with what you're trying to tell them, will get them over the line.
Yeah,
you need to give the information and the data as well, a lot as well. Otherwise, there's nothing there. But that emotional connection is really important.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was I have no idea who this quote was attributed to. It's probably one of those ones that's been passed through many different names. But it's the worst reaction you can get is no reaction at all. And that I have heard that through writers, through musicians, through professional wrestlers, anything and everything when it comes to, especially doing it in front of an audience, especially if you can get a negative reaction, if you can get a positive reaction, like you said, if you can get that emotion out of your audience, people are going to get invested, people are going to be drawn in, people are going to be more connected to that side of the advertising and the marketing you're doing, right?
And even if half the people or 9 out of 10 people are having a negative reaction, that means that one is having a positive reaction. And one positive reaction is better than 100 meh reactions.
That's a really good way of thinking about it, because I don't know if this was the case of me growing up in my teens in the 2000s and early 2010s, but the generation of meh, like the millennial meh that we got into thanks to things like The Simpsons and all the stuff I grew up on, it's nice to see that we're kind of back in the, I don't want to say the extremes of emotions of marketing at the moment, but we seem to be in an era where there's a lot of like unhinged social media content and people purposefully doing negative stuff about their own brands, almost like ironically and cleverly and all that kind of stuff. Do you feel like there's that natural evolution because there's storytelling is an inherent part of us as humans, right? This all happens in cycles
It
and
is.
waves.
Yeah, I think that you've made a really good point there about brands making negative comments about their products. That's really important. In story, when you're telling a story, because as you said earlier, I write stories. I read an awful lot of stories. Nobody's interested in a perfect character. Any interesting character has flaws, and any product that you're selling has flaws. Nothing does everything. Nothing appeals to everybody, and it's very easy, or we often try to gloss over those flaws or just not talk about them. Actually, by talking about them, by bringing them out in the open, we're almost humanizing that product. We're making it a lot more believable and trustworthy and real. And that's a really good way to engage with people. Like, Star Wars would have been absolutely rubbish if Luke was the perfect hero. If Han Solo wasn't a lovable rogue, it doesn't work. And it's the same kind of principle, the same kind of thing. You can't appeal to everybody. So you own that. You own the fact that your thing doesn't do everything. It's not the do all and the be all and the end all. But it does do one thing really well.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that a lot of brands are learning. It's definitely something we've talked about on the show before with a few guests when it comes to that. Tying it into the EEAT principles that I know Google talk about so often when it comes to being honest with your audience, and this is something I've been talking about a lot recently, is that authenticity, as much as a buzzword and a cliche word as that is now. There's that element where being honest with your audience and saying, yeah, there are pros and there are cons to this thing, rather than just, we're the best, come and listen to this podcast because it's the best podcast, it'll blow your mind, you'll learn all of the things, every other podcast is crap. There's that element of relatability, like you said, that the flawed character part of that narrative where you can bring in and be, well, yeah, maybe I do struggle with daddy issues like Luke does, or maybe I do struggle with, do I take the easy path and go down the dark side and make a negative choice for a short-term gain, or do I stick out with it and try and, this is sticking with the Star Wars analogy, try and redeem my father and make him the guy that throws the evil wizard down a giant shaft in a space station. Maybe stretch the analogy there a little bit, but you get what I mean.
Absolutely. There's been some brilliant campaigns that use that exact technique. It's quite a while ago now. They haven't done it for a while, but you might remember the Stella Artois campaign, Reassuringly Expensive. It ran for, I think, decades. And that was brilliant. Two words. So copywriting doesn't need to be loads of words. Like the right 2 words are all you need. But what a brilliant campaign. And it worked. It sold loads of fizzy lager. And then they changed it. They changed it, but they kept I can't remember the wording of it, but it was something ridiculously like, this beer is quite expensive but delicious. It's like, how have you gone from such perfection and this is an improvement somehow?
That's a lesson a lot of us could learn for our content writing, is sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. When you can tell something succinctly and straightforward rather than waffling on, which I am very warrant to do on this show and in life, as my friends and loved ones will tell you. I'm a talker, hence why I host so many podcasts. But I think there is a lot of power in, especially in marketing and especially in advertising. You know, we're giving the example there of 2 words, whether that's a TV ad, a YouTube ad, a billboard on the side of a bus stop, whatever it is. If you can convey that emotion and that story and your brand and what you really stand for and those values in 2 words, that's kind of magic, right? That's gold dust right there.
Absolutely. There's a great quote, and I can't remember the exact quote, and I can't remember who it's from. I think it's a designer, and it goes something like, "Perfection is achieved when there is nothing left to subtract."
Ooh,
which is brilliant, right?
Yeah, it's the
when
opposite
you know
of
you
like Death
can't
of a
take,
Thousand Cuts.
yeah, when you can't take anything else away, you've nailed it. Brilliant, perfect.
Yeah, I find that when it comes to my creative process, I'm always more of an editor and a curator rather than an ideas kind of guy. So I'm always the one that is, like you said, trimming down that stuff and editing. When I used to, write songs in bands and stuff, they would be the other guys that would come with, here's a chorus, here's a riff, here's a bit, here's the there. But but if we structure that and make that 3 bars longer that way and then 2 bars that way and then all that shifting around and stuff like that, that's how my brain works. And I don't think that's necessarily the logic-y kind of sciencey side of my brain or the ADHD side kind of battling with each other, and having that element where if you can trim something down and edit it, like I think you need to be super, super brutal sometimes. And
absolutely
the classic the kill your darlings thing that so many creatives talk about over the decades. You can't write a blog post and be, and submit it to a client or send it to a stakeholder or pass it over to your manager and then be heartbroken when they start making changes and edits and all that kind of stuff, right?
I mean, you saw the notes I wrote for this podcast. I am very much a brain dumper. I will, when I start working on something, it will be enormous. There will be thousands of words. There will be notebooks full of stuff. And because I think it's a guy called Dan Nelken wrote a book called The Self-Help Guide for Copywriters. And one of the things he talks about is that you can't expect to sit down and come up with a brilliant idea straight away. It just doesn't work like that. But what you can do is sit down and come up with 100 ideas. And what you have to do is you give your brain permission to have bad ideas, because then you just bash them out. You bash out hundreds of ideas, and maybe 5 of them will actually have some value. And then you can refine those 5 down and you get that brilliant one. But if you sit down wanting to have that one straight away, you're not giving your brain permission to chance. You haven't got the opportunity to come up with those ideas. You have to have the bad ideas to have the good ideas.
Yeah, definitely. You've just described my process for coming up with YouTube titles for this podcast. Just like throw every combination of every word that is relevant and every possible clickbaity bollocks headline type thing and just be like, how clickbaity should I be? How realistic should I be? What makes sense? Like what would work there? And honestly, for listeners and viewers, if you saw the various headlines I have rejected and titles for the podcast, and I do the same thing for blog posts. I think that's totally relevant for what medium you're working in, right? Depending on whether you're writing
your headline.
We hear the working titles of films over the years, like take Blue Harvest being the example of Star Wars, to go back to Star Wars. So many other ones that are absolutely terrible and are just like, here is the very base concept of this film. I can't remember. There was one for Hellraiser, and I'm trying to remember what it was. It is something really stupid. It is sadomasochists from beyond the grave.
I mean, it does what it said on the tin, though, doesn't it?
You're kind of right, yeah. Like, the gist is there. I get it. Like, Clive Barker's got the right idea, but I think Hellraiser is a much catchier, sexier horror kind of title. That makes sense.
But you start with that again, and that's a really good point. Is that sometimes a great place to start is just by describing the thing. Literally write down what it is and work from there. That can be one of your 100 ideas that then leads you to your Hellraiser, which is iconic, obviously.
Yeah, that worked really well for products, right? I think when it comes to, but even when thinking about things like alt text and stuff like that, when you're thinking about literally describing that product and writing a product description, you can get into the real sort of like specifics and details. But sometimes just give it a broad description, and that might then let you pick around and like, oh, actually, no, the key component of it is this bit or that bit, and writing down as much of the physical description, the use of the product, the use of the service, whatever it is, can really unlock stuff. And I totally agree with you. Having that, I think the scariest thing for me as a writer, and I know so many other people have the same feeling, and it sounds like you do as well with the brain dump technique of the scariest thing is the empty page, right? The blank page
Absolutely,
is the most intimidating thing. And when your boss or your client or your manager or whatever it is like, right, I need a new product description, I need a new title, I need a new meta description, I need a new blog post about this topic, whatever it is, you're going through your content plan, like, okay, so where do we start? What's the plan here? And like you said, just having that briefest description of what is the product, what does it look like, what does it do, who is it for, and start from there can make such a big difference in terms of you understanding, like we said, the pros, the cons, the flaws, the benefits, the strengths, the weaknesses, all that kind of stuff, where you can make that content and the product descriptions and anything else relatable to your audience. Because as you said, well, like, none of us are perfect. No product is perfect. No service is perfect. As much as plenty of people in marketing and snake oil salesmen and all that kind of stuff will try and sell you that, yeah, our tool is the best or our agency is the best or whatever it is, we're all humans at the end of the day. And if you can make your stuff relatable, then people are going to resonate with it.
Yeah, you mentioned as well about kind of the benefits of products. One of the things I like to do, when you're trying to write a headline or a snappy description, is start listing those benefits. And then I think I read this in Eddie Schleiner's book. Eddie Schleiner, brilliant. You should definitely follow him on LinkedIn. He says that his suggestion is that come with a benefit and then ask yourself, so what? And you just keep going down this hole of so what until you kind of distill it down. You probably go for 10, 15 layers of so what's sometimes to kind of get to that. Oh, that one nails it.
I love
it's great.
that.
It's another way to start getting stuff on the page. Just get stuff on there, because, like you say, looking at a blank page and I've got to write something is the worst feeling in the world. But saying, right, I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes. I'm going to bang out some benefits, and I'm going to say so what to all of them. Suddenly, you've got 4 pages of ideas that you can start working with.
Yeah, that almost pulls on the explain it to me like a 5-year-old thing, right? Because I don't know if anyone, I know you're a father yourself, Will. Like I mentioned, I have some family members before we started recording, having these conversations. You're gonna get so what kind of questions. Why? Like,
why is another great one.
So I'm doing a podcast with Will Slater. We're going to be talking about storytelling, copyright. Why? Like,
so what?
Because people want to tell better stories to be better marketers. Why? So they can make more money for clients and their bosses and stuff. Why? Because money fuels the world, and we live in a capitalist. Oh god, I'm spinning out of control. Just that simple little exercise of treat your audience like they're 5, and then obviously then tailor it to your audience afterwards. But that initial process, I think, can be such a brilliant way of getting the gears going and working and getting your brain thinking about that kind of thing when it comes to starting with the basics, and then you can get into the details and the technical bits and pieces and all that kind of thing.
And I do exactly the same when I'm writing stories, when I'm writing fiction, except kind of backwards. So I'll come up, like, my brain's like a crazy whirlwind of nonsense, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night with ideas. I think, what if? And I'll write it down in my notebook, and then I'll come back to it, and I'll have this idea. What if there was a world where the planet slowed down and there was a giant city, but it was like on caterpillar tracks, a bit like the Jawa sandcrawlers, and it had to follow the equator around the world? I go, okay, what about the people who lived on it? What about them? Why does it have to do this? What happened to the world? And I've built a whole novel from this single concept just by asking questions. What if? What if? What if? What if somebody from another world crashed? What if then this? And what if that? And it's it like asking those questions is the way to create, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something, I know, speaking on fiction for a second, I've definitely done with characters before. When you're thinking about their motivations, when you're thinking about how they would react to something rather than how you would react to something as the author, as
Yeah,
the
yeah.
storyteller. I know that's a brilliant thing. A lot of my friends who are much better actors than I am, I've done a bit of voice acting over the years, but never really dove into it much. But they say you truly know a character when you feel like they're speaking through you. When somebody asks you a question and you just instinctively know, like, oh yeah, James Bond would answer in this way, or, you know, whatever. There's that element where when you're writing a character, when you're coming up with personas for your marketing, think about how they would answer it, not how, well, yeah, obviously you know the product, you know the service, you know the thing you're writing about because you're the writer, you're the one doing the research and having the conversations. But maybe your audience is less educated or less knowledgeable in that particular subject. So think about
Yeah.
what that kind of thing, what kind of questions would a 5-year-old, a teenager, a 60-year-old, whoever it is, whoever your target audience for that product is or that service, what
So
kind of questions would they be asking?
when I'm doing that, I tend to try and go to the nth degree with personas, because I think there's that quite famous meme where your persona is like a 77-year-old man who lives in a castle, and it could be King Charles or it could be Ozzy Osbourne, and it's ridiculous, but it's true. Like, the more vague your persona is, the less useful it is. So quite often I will invent an actual person in my head that I'm selling to. So when I'm writing, I am talking to that one person. And I find that really helpful because I know what the questions they're asking. I build this person from, I don't just imagine it in my head. It's research. It's looking on Reddit, in forums. It's about talking to customers if you can do it. It's about getting the sales team to find out what the questions are. And you build this one person and you almost write it like a conversation with them. And I find that really helpful because I just find personas a bit vague, a bit wishy-washy. Whereas
Yeah.
if I've got Bob in accounts, I know exactly who I'm talking to. I know what he wants to know. I know that he's getting stressed about such and such a thing or whatever, and that's how I need to talk to him. I know that he, I maybe sometimes go a bit too far with him, to be honest, but that's part of the fun.
I think that's the brilliant example, like you said. Take a British man who's 75. Is it Ozzy Osbourne or is it our current King Charles? Like that, the vague persona there. The more you can kind of fiddle around and tweak and be more specific, like you're saying, when you get into essentially creating a real person who is believable when it comes to thinking about their age bracket. Like I was having a conversation with my wife on our commute this morning where it's like all of our friends have gotten married recently. Now, we got married 2 years ago, and talking about some of our friends are getting divorced or having kids and all this kind of stuff that happens in your 30s. That stuff matters and hugely affects the decisions you make for the things you buy, the brands you invest in, all this kind of stuff. Me as a person who doesn't have kids but is married, I have pets, I own a house, all this kind of stuff, that element of me changes massively the kind of things I want to buy and invest in. And people talking to you like, I don't know if I'm sure you've seen this, Will, viewers and listeners, I'm sure you've seen this as well. The Instagram ads and Facebook ads are like, are you a 33-year-old man who lives in Norwich? And I'm like, well, I'm 34 now, but yes, I guess so. Like, do you need to worry about life insurance? I'm like, oh God, yeah, I guess so. God, thanks for reminding me of my mortality there, Instagram. Appreciate that. But they have that
45-year-old men in Hull are doing this amazing insurance trick.
Exactly. And you get those T-shirts that are like, I'm the best 34-year-old guy from Norwich who also records a podcast and blah, 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 who has a cat named after a character from How to Train Your Dragon and all that kind of thing. It's like those hyper-specific, ridiculous marketing things. There is some merit to that, as stupid as it sounds and as silly and as borderline patronizing as some of them are sometimes. There is a lot of element there. There is genuine, like you said, taking the data from your audience. And this is, I think, a brilliant way to connect. I mentioned Julia at the beginning of the show, and taking that data and the understanding and the science behind it and combining that with the creative side of things, which I think is where so many brands go wrong. They either do the full, we're so data driven, we're so focused on all the data, and don't think about the psychology and the reactionary, the creative side of things. Or the other side of like, we're a creative agency who just waffle on about stuff and we just hope that it's real, and we made up this persona out of thin air. Here's Jack from Norwich. He's probably not even real. It's like, okay. Like I said, is Jack married? Does he have kids? Is he full-time employed? Is he, part-time? All this kind of stuff. That stuff matters when it comes to understanding your audience better. And I think when you can get down to the specifics of how people are thinking, how people are going to react to stuff, you can then tailor your, like we said, those 2 specific words, that perfectly edited down little headline to really react to a specific audience. And even with like local advertising, you can then tailor it to specific areas. Like, I know, using Instagram ads as an example there, that is a hugely relevant thing for a lot of our clients and a lot of the brands we work with, where it comes to Google ads, whether it comes to social ads and stuff like that. And that's also relevant for organic content. Tailoring your stuff to different markets and different audiences, I think, is something a lot of people really underestimate in content writing for organic search.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time people will do those very top level personas. So it's like, 40-year-old man from Swansea, whatever, which doesn't tell you anything useful. The age doesn't matter. It's only a starting point. So, okay, he's 45, but what's the product? What does he want from that product? What are his needs? And that's how you start building something that you can then speak to. Because, King Charles, Ozzy Osbourne.
I hope you'd have a slightly different conversation between Ozzy Osbourne and King Charles.
Well, exactly. That exactly, yeah.
You wouldn't quite have the same approach.
I mean, they both mumble a lot, so actually maybe it'd be quite similar.
That's true. They both had their fair share of, they're in their 70s, so I was about to say they both had their fair share of health conditions in the last few years. Like, well, yeah, they're in their mid-70s. That kind of makes sense. Yeah. One of them's lived a very hard life full of sex and drugs and rock and roll, and the other one's Ozzy Osbourne. So, hey, there we go. Had to do it. But yeah, back to storytelling for a second. I think Ozzy Osbourne's a nice little segue there, because, as you said, you did a massive brain dump on the show notes, and me being me, I came in and did like, oh, here's 7 little bullet points of the thing, and I did a little rough little structure for us. And if you've listened to or watched the show before, this is pretty conversational, folks. Like, we bounce around, but there is a little bit of structure. Will and I did come together and bring our heads together and think about things. And something you brought up that I maybe would have made the connection to, even thinking about how storytelling is relevant to us, and I know something you and I are both very passionate about, is music. And Ozzy Osbourne being the nice little segue there, I find music being the way to tell stories is so fascinating. We said, like, editing something down into, can you tell a story in 2 words on a billboard or on a bus stop or in an Instagram ad, can be a really similar process to, as I said earlier, when I was in bands in my 20s, how do you make this chorus fit, 15 syllables in between the bit where the guitar plays this and the piano does that. That nature of getting that stuff down to the lyrics and how it integrates with the music and how it all comes together, for me, sounds like a kind of similar process to writing content and writing fiction.
Very much so. I think there's an awful lot to be learnt from music and the way that songwriters and lyricists construct their songs, because most songs follow a broadly similar structure. You've got, your verse, chorus, middle eight, verse, chorus, whatever. They're all pretty similar.
A, B, C, A, B, A, or something like that.
It's something like that, isn't it? Yeah. And there's a bit of variety. Sometimes you'll get an extra chorus or whatever, but they're all pretty similar. And working within a structure is really important. But also, when you're writing a song, you've got, 2.5, 3 minutes, most sort of pop songs. So obviously,
it's the same prog rock as I do.
I was going to say Mastodon, maybe go a little bit longer. But
there you go.
A lot of songs, 2 or 3 minutes long. And to be fair, a lot of prog metal stuff is just slowed down. It's actually the same length. It's just much slower. But that doesn't give you a lot of time to tell that story, to build that emotional connection with your listener. It doesn't at all. You can't, you write a novel, you've got 100,000 words. I don't know how many words you get in 3 minutes, but it's not very many. And half of them are choruses, so they're repeated. So you have to be incredibly kind of sparse and selective with the words you're choosing. And actually, when you're writing copy for a website, whether it's sales copy or whether it's informational content, whatever, it's kind of important to remember that chances are the person who's reading doesn't actually want to read what you're writing. They want to know what the thing is going to do for them, or they want to know how they can fix the problem that they search for, that your content is telling them about. And you kind of learn a lot by seeing how those songwriters have just compressed this story into that such a tiny time. I mean, I could literally talk for hours about my favourite lyricists, but I'm going to throw one out there because there's a band called the Weaker Thans, or there was a band that this split up quite a while ago now, early 2000s, which makes me feel really old. And John K. Samson from the Weaker Thans is genuinely, I think, I was going to say one of the best lyricists of this generation, but actually I'm old now, so it's a previous generation really. But one of my favourite lyrics of his is from a song called Left and Leaving. And it goes, "My city's still breathing, but barely it's true. Through buildings gone missing like teeth." And I can almost guarantee that when I read that out, or when you listen to him sing it, you get an image in your head. You kind of, you picture this slightly derelict city, and it's just the metaphors and the simile and the imagery is just so powerful in how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 10 words, 12 words. Most writers couldn't write a better description than that over 10 pages. And yeah, that's I just love listening to music for that reason. And you know, you're probably not going to use quite such lyrical language when you're writing about, you know, the Procurement Reform Act, but you can still learn how to compress things.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's that, like you said, conjuring that picture, that reaction, just that little extra bit of the missing buildings like teeth is such a relatable thing. Like, we all have teeth, for want of a better phrase. Like, that's something that is so inherently human, inherently relatable, and just adding those extra couple of words. Like, you could literally have that first line of just, you know, a derelict city, lots of missing buildings. Like, oh, that's a statement on maybe how, like, businesses are really struggling now. It could be a post-pandemic discussion. It could be a, you know, 2008 financial crash discussion. It is resonating throughout history, but adding that little bit extra, there's a couple of extra words of just like teeth, you instantly, like you said, get that picture in your head. And I think you can really do powerful things with words combined with imagery, whether it's making those words conjure something in the reader's imagination, or literally combining it with imagery in, like, I keep going back to like billboard advertising and bus stop advertising, which I know isn't very digital marketing of me, but still relevant to social ads and organic content as well. Literally having that structure and the way you present it and adding that little bit extra that just conjures the picture in your brain. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and the other thing it does really well is it stimulates the senses. So when you're writing, we remember things better that stimulate more than one sense. So there's a sensation of breathing, and missing teeth. You can feel what it's like
you
to have
almost
a
want to
missing
go
teeth.
like,
Yeah, you kind of putting your tongue to that gap in your teeth. And if you can stimulate those senses, and it's especially important if you're writing product descriptions, that kind of thing. Because most of the time when you're writing a product description, you're probably going to have a picture of that product up there. So there is limited value in describing what it looks like. You know, you don't there's no point saying that spending 50 words describing what colour of red the jumper is, because you can see that it's right there up on the screen. But if you describe how it feels, like how it keeps you warm, how snuggly and comfortable it is, you're starting to stimulate the different senses, the feel or the sound or whatever. And the more of those you stimulate, the more it kind of engages people and gets those gets kind of the not endorphins, hormones releasing in people's brain, which is why stories work so well. They make us release chemicals that make things happen in our brain.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it can be something as simple as, I literally saw this on the commute this morning with my wife, like I was saying. there's a sign outside a coffee shop here in Norwich that is, by the time you've read this sign, you're probably thinking I should buy a coffee or something. You're probably thirsty for coffee or something like that. And it's such a simple little thing. And I know I'm using on the street marketing here, but I think it is still hugely relevant for so much digital marketing content that we make. Having that sense of thirsty, hungry, do your teeth feel a certain way? Having that little thing where you can conjure up that sense. And I love the way you say multiple senses really help cement stuff in there, because I feel like a lot of people talk about how powerful the sense of smell can be for your memory and stuff like that, and combining that with I think the often misquoted, probably outdated phrase is you have to see a brand 9 times before it sticks in your memory. So you'll see them on an Instagram ad and then see them again sponsoring a conference and then see them again. Oh, there's somebody who's a guest on a podcast who is from that brand. And then eventually you're like, oh yeah, I recognize that company. I recognize that brand, whatever it is. But if you, like you said, if you can tap into the base human reactions of the senses, like that is the most fundamental pre-language, pre-communication. Before we had internet and podcasts and YouTube and Spotify and all that kind of stuff, you could just communicate with simple little things like senses and body language, and that is such a fundamental element of relating to other people and other humans and other creatures that it can really tap into something that I think a lot of people underestimate. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. An interesting thing on that point is when you're what you want to try and do, and this applies equally when you're writing a novel or a story, or whether you're writing copy content, whatever. You want to try and make the reader feel something. Don't tell them what or how to feel. So you don't say, feel cold, put a jumper on. You say, sat shivering at your desk, put a jumper on. That using that description. There's a great book by Chuck Palahniuk. It's called, what's it called? Consider This. And it's a series of essays essentially on writing that have changed the way he writes. And one of the things he suggests doing when you're writing is spend, I can't remember how long he said, maybe a year, where you completely do not use any terms which describe feelings. So you're not allowed to say, it felt cold, Dave felt cold, or, Bob felt stressed. You've got to describe physically what's happening. And I've been trying to do that for a while now. It's really difficult when you're writing, but you really start to notice when you read stuff that doesn't do that, and it starts to feel a bit clunky, and it really hits you a lot harder when you do it that way. And Palahniuk's a master. I mean, he's a fantastic writer anyway. But yeah, don't say software license management is really stressful. Say, do you get sweaty palms every time you open up the software license management Excel? It starts. It stimulates those senses. It stimulates that brain in a slightly different way. And you actually start, if it's you, if it's really talking to you, you get those sweaty palms because it does stress you out. And that has so much more power than just telling you something that you already know.
Yeah, absolutely. Funny enough, that sweaty palms reminded me. I did an ad read for those of you who've been to Brighton SEO. You might recognize my voice from the Dragometrics ads that run before every talk. And the opening line is, "Does SEO reporting make you want to shove sharp things up your nose?" I was like, we all have stress with SEO reporting, like whether you're reporting to stakeholders, whether you're reporting to clients, whatever it is, and you have that feeling. And I know my colleagues have sat next to me when I'm trying to make a Looker Studio dashboard work, and I click the wrong thing and it all breaks and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just sat there like, oh God, it's not working. Why isn't it working? The most frustrating part of my job, apart from maybe when podcast files delete themselves accidentally and Audition crashes or Premiere Pro crashes or whatever. But that little thing, just like you said, having that relatable element and having that bit that really conjures up that situation, really puts the reader in that moment rather than, like you said, telling them how to feel. And show don't tell is such a thing that has been drilled into my brain. So to give you some context, Will, and for the listeners and viewers who don't know, I come from a comic book background, so I was writing comics 10, 15 years ago or so, and that was such a fundamental part of that medium, as you can imagine. I mentioned earlier the combined visuals and text side of things. To waste time and waste space and waste the reader's time, like you said with a product description, they can see the product, they can see the jumper is red, they can see the thing is, taller than this or shorter than that or whatever it is. You don't have to also say that in the text. You can give them the wider context and make them feel things that aren't just, oh, isn't this red jumper the reddest jumper you've ever seen? Don't you want a lovely red jumper in XL? It's like, I mean, sure, yeah, but like, what's different to every other red jumper in the world?
Yeah,
and
how is this jumper going to make me feel?
Exactly. Is it a warm jumper? Is it a light jumper? Is it a cardigan? Does it have buttons? Does it have a design on it that is like from referencing a specific thing or whatever? Those extra elements of building that story around that product rather than just saying, this is product A and this is what it does. This is what it looks like. Here it is. Actually making that thing actually tell their story and put the reader in that position, like we said, coming back to those personas and making that the reader part of that story, like you said, right as if you're talking to someone, as you said earlier, well, having that element there where instead of you just saying, that's a really warm jumper, or it's a great jumper, or it's a red jumper. Why? How? Why? back to the so what element.
It's where knowing your audience really helps, and what the jumper is aimed at. Is it a jumper that you expect people to be sat at the desk working? Is it a jumper where people are going to be climbing mountains and getting out in the wilds? And you can tell that story in so many different ways depending on who you're talking to. It's the big baggy jumper that you can just relax in, or it's wool so it'll keep you warm when it's wet. There's so many different ways that you can really get into it.
I think you've seen this before. A lot of off-brand stuff you see on like TikTok Shop and Temu and all the kind of like drop shipping stuff. You will literally see the same product described like 15 different ways. Like, this jumper is a Christmas jumper. The next one is like, it's a Halloween jumper. It's like, that's the same jumper. And then like you said, this one's a jumper for hiking. And then this one's a jumper for relaxing. Or this one's, is your office cold? Here's a jumper. It's like, that's the same product. What are you talking about? But
like it does all those things.
Yeah, exactly.
It's many things to many people. I think that the comics is a really interesting example as well of different ways to tell stories, because I've never written comics, but I've read quite a lot. I found it really interesting. Comics, certainly from different eras, tell stories in very different ways. Like you read comics from sort of, I don't know, the gold and silver ages of comics, and there'll be a lot of often you get a lot of internal monologue in the little like square boxes or the thought bubbles.
Yep.
And then you read comics from another era or another writer, and actually there'll be a lot more visual. They'll be, instead of explaining those emotions, they'll be showing them. I think as well as the art's got more advanced and the printing techniques have got better, you can show a lot more in a comic, which means you don't need to tell as much. But then you have people like Alan Moore who wrote From Hell, which is, I mean, it's if you've ever never read it, I would recommend it. It's hard work. It's this deep dive into psychosis and Jack the Ripper. It's completely bonkers. But that's a huge amount of text in there with the beautiful image. The imagery is very simple, but it works. There's a lot of flexibility within that medium, and we can definitely. Like it's the same when you're writing your copy, your content. How close is it going to be to the imagery? Are you actually writing an article, which is an instructional article, and actually most of the imagery is going to be stock, in which case you're not going to rely too much on the imagery. Or you're writing a product description where you've got really good photography and you can lean a lot more heavily into that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's so. Like I said, maybe that's my background in comics, as the lessons I've learned from writing scripts. I can't draw to save my life, but I can write a script. So that was the element there. And having that conversation with so many people, that, oh yeah, I've written comics, I've been published in a couple of places, and they're like, oh, did you draw it? And I'm like, no, that's not. Typically, that's not how modern comics work. And coming back round to, like you said, going back to the golden and silver age, back in the 60s, and for those of you who know comics well, you will already know this, but some of you might not do. When it comes to the early days of things like Spider-Man, the Fantastic Four, when Stan Lee was the driving force behind a lot of the writing in Marvel, you have people like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, who are these legendary artists. And what is often misconstrued, and I think is now a lot more publicly well known, is people like Kirby and Ditko were making the stories. They would draw the entire comic from start to finish, all 20 pages, give or take. And then Stanley would come in and be like, anyway, I'll come in and write about Spider-Man on top of the panels. And we're like, okay, so you're credited as the writer, but the story has already been told. And they're some of my favorite issues of comics, which is a weird, redundant term, but are known as silent comics. There's an amazing issue of David Aja is the artist and Matt Fraction's the writer of their Hawkeye series from about 10 years ago or so. And it focuses on Clint Barton, who's the Hawkeye at the time, with Kate Bishop, who's the other Hawkeye. For those of you who've seen the Disney Plus show, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a dog that they get called Lucky. And there is a Christmas issue of that comic that is all told from Lucky's perspective. And Lucky, being a dog, doesn't speak human languages. So he's getting mixed in with the Russian mafia that Hawkeye's dealing with. He's chatting with he's overhearing conversations in English from the people in New York and all that kind of stuff. But he's a dog, so he doesn't understand anything. So all the speech bubbles are all blurry and weird and jumbled and just like symbols and stuff that sometimes represent the emotions, sometimes don't. And it's a magical piece of storytelling. I think it's literally 22 pages of this dog, known as Pizza Dog, because he collects a slice of pizza and takes it across New York. It's a brilliant piece of storytelling, and something so simple that taught me so much about that show don't tell aspect of. There is so much you can tell just with the visuals, just the way you lay things out. You mentioned, I know I'm off on a comics tangent. Sorry, folks who don't care about comics. This is all relevant, I promise. You mentioned Alan Moore there being one of the legends of British comic book writing and one of the legends of British storytelling, I think, over the last 40 or so years. And the way him and Dave Gibbons used the 9-panel grid in Watchmen, like one of the most definitive superhero stories, something that really kind of shifted a lot of people's perspective on superheroes and the way comic stories can be told in the 80s. And a lot of people say that ushered in this sort of postmodern era of comics that we're now in, even now 40 years later. They always used a 3x3 9-grid panel for every single page. Doesn't matter if you want to do a big splash page of a big action scene. Doesn't matter if it's just talking heads of newsreels and newscasters discussing the latest crazy thing that Ozymandias has done. It's always 9 panels, every single page. And it is such a simple choice that can relate to how you lay out your product grid. I know we're getting into like UX stuff here and visual storytelling, but I think that is hugely relevant. I was literally having a conversation with one of my e-commerce clients yesterday, talking about the difference between a category listing page, so a parent category that lists all the other options to get into the subcategories, and why perhaps a user with transactional intent might not be satisfied by landing on that page compared to landing on a product listing page, which is the category that has all of the products in the grid. And we even had a conversation about, that top content that has become very, very popular in SEO of here's what this category does and here's all the internal links to the other related products and stuff. I think there is a lot of value in that kind of content, especially if you do a read more option and give the user the ability to not read all of your waffle and get straight to the products. But the way you lay out your products, the way you structure your blog content, the way you structure your pillar pages when it comes to connecting all of this stuff together can have a huge influence on where the eye reads and where you're leading to. Like, again, coming back around to comics as an example, using novels as an example, we typically read from left to right, top to bottom. So you're going from top left to bottom right. I know I'm the other way around on YouTube. Top left to bottom right. That was very counterintuitive. And the same is true when it comes to reading stories, reading content. The way you structure your ad, the way you where you put the wording. We use the reassuringly expensive from Stella Artois earlier. Like, is that in the top left? Is that the first thing you see? Or do you see the pint of beer first and then it's reassuringly expensive? All that stuff matters. And the way you structure literally your words, things like poetry. I know friend of the show and former guest Chloe Smith could talk about this for years and years and years. They brilliant analysis of poetry and stuff like that. The way you structure your words and put them in the order on the website, on the webpage, whatever it is, can make such a huge difference to the reader and how they interpret it, right?
100%, yeah. And I think structure does go as far as how you structure your headings from an SEO point of view.
Yeah.
Something that so many people get wrong. Nested headings, people. H1, H2, H3, H4. Don't mess around with it. It works. It's there for a reason.
Even a simple, very, very briefly, you did that in the show notes for this podcast. I always get either, why do you bother? Or, oh, thank God you did that. When I do it from, because my co-host on my film podcast is somehow seems to exist with, despite being a professional writer who has won awards for the writing he has done for films and web series and online content and all that kind of stuff, doesn't seem to use formatting at all. So whenever he creates our show notes, it's just our block of words. Like, there's no tables, there's no headings, there's no bullet points. Like, what is going on here? Whereas I go in like almost formatting first. Like, right, if I need to draw up a table here, like you said, well, you go in with your H1, your H2, your H3. You're thinking about these different structures. Where am I going to mark up this schema for this bullet point and all this kind of stuff? Where's the markdown of the HTML? Even coming down to that technical stuff, I go straight in with that, and I massively appreciated you went straight in and was like, yeah, I've got my H1s, got my H2s, I'm straight in. Nobody's going to see this Google Doc. Nobody cares. It's not a public document.
You see it. I see it. Exactly. I'm going to be honest with you. When that document started in a different document, it wasn't nicely formatted. Like when I'm first making the notes and doing the brain dump, it is literally bleh, it splurges out onto the page. But then I want to be able to go back to it and look at it and know what the heck I'm looking at. And not just tomorrow, not just the next day, potentially a year down the line. If I'm writing notes for a story or something, I need to be able to understand them later on. So that formatting is hugely important. And it's the same when you're writing an article for the web, because it makes it easier for people to read it. You can scan for the heading you want. You can just, yeah. And I think on the flip side, like, just because you're working with a structure doesn't mean that everything you write is going to be the same. And one of the examples I quite like for that, so that when you're writing a story, novel, film, whatever, an awful lot will follow a structure called the hero's journey. If you know anything about writing, you'll know about it. It's Harry Potter, Star Wars, all follow. Like, there's another good meme where you can basically change the word wizard for Jedi and Harry for Luke, and the outline for the first Star Wars movie and the first Harry Potter story are identical. But that's fine, because you could do the same thing with a lot of stories. But the example I really like to use with that is Dune. So, firstly, famously, George Lucas did steal a lot of ideas from Dune for Star Wars, but he made something completely different with it. And we all steal ideas. We all amalgamate things. That's how we create. Nothing is new. That's not knocking Star Wars. But the two stories, if you've ever read Dune, I'm going to guess most people have probably seen Star Wars. If you've ever read Dune or seen the Villeneuve movie, actually, it's very different, but it kind of has the same themes. It follows the same structure as Star Wars. It follows the hero's journey. It's a hero's journey for Paul Atreides, but it subverts it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was originally written as kind of a response against the simplicity of that, but against it's basically a parable about the dangers of ultimate power. You don't get any of that in Star Wars. It's just a great story about Luke Skywalker. Either is fine, but it's sometimes working within a structure actually gives you more license to be creative. And it's kind of going back to the empty page syndrome. If you feel like you can do anything, it's like, well, what the flip do I do? Whereas if you start with a structure And I'll sometimes use the hero's journey when I'm writing copy. You can kind of substitute, you know, you can make the reader is the hero, and then the mentor or the elixir is your product that comes along, and they have to either solve a problem. You use a villain in it, which is the problem that they're facing. I love using villains, even if you're not using that structure. Villains in copy are brilliant. But the point is that it's a great way to get started. It's a structure that resonates with people. People are used to that structure. They don't necessarily realize it, but it kind of it flows naturally. You understand what's happening. Even when you're surprised by something, you kind of not, because you knew it was going to follow that same structure. And, you know, even if it's just as simple as using a beginning, a middle, and an end, that's in. I'm probably good. That structure gives something people to kind of anchor to, and it gives you something to work from, and it's a really useful technique to sort of kind of decide I'm writing something that's going to be quite long. I've probably got room for it. It doesn't have to be that long to fit a hero's journey in there, or actually I'm writing something that's only going to be a lot shorter. You know, I've only got room for a beginning, middle, and an end. And like, there's copywriters often bang on about Ernest Hemingway as a writer to kind of look at, because firstly he's brilliant at being incredibly concise and doing the thing we mentioned earlier about not telling people how to feel. But just to give you an idea of how concise he is, I can't remember the actual story about the story, but I think someone asked him how short a story he could make. And he thought about it, and he said 6 words. And this person was like, "What? You can't write an engaging story in 6 words." And Hemingway said, "Baby shoes for sale, never worn." And that's it.
It's instant emotional reaction, right?
Exactly. That's the story. But so much power in 6 words. But it's got a beginning, a middle, an end. Baby shoes starts a story. For sale, there's your middle. Never worn. There's your ending. It's an open ending. It leaves you thinking. It leaves you wondering. But such a powerful thing. You know, you don't have to describe everything. It's really powerful to describe enough to put your reader in the whatever it is, in the story, in the thing you're trying to sell. But let their imagination, let their brain fill in the blanks. Because again, if you make them work in that way, they will engage a lot more rather than just skimming over it, because they've had to stop. They've had to actually pay some attention and do something there.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful short story that I think I've seen so many people get wrong. Like we were saying earlier, as much as we joked about the reassuringly expensive from Stella Artois, and then how they shifted that to, you had 2 words that described the thing that get a reaction. How did you mess that up? Those 6 words from Hemingway. And I know there's a really common thing that will regularly crop up on the various writing subreddits that is, tell me your story in 10 words or less. And there's a whole subculture of horror stories that are just 5, 6, 10 words, whatever it is. There's a really, really concise side of things.
Micro stories are a brilliant way to practice your writing. Like,
absolutely.
I don't go on Twitter anymore, but X, sorry, whatever. But when it was a thing, like writing stories in tweets, it's great fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It can seem like such an easy thing to do, but as we said, 45 minutes ago or so, like telling a short story in so few words without any of the waffle, without the extra context, can be so difficult. And that translates perfectly to character limits in ad copy, to limits in headlines. You know, we talk about
writing a meta description.
Exactly, meta description and page titles. How much of that page title is Google actually going to show somebody on a search engine result page compared to what is actually after the ... and all that kind of stuff. Being able to convey a message and tell a story in few words is such a powerful technique. And if you can do that, like we said, for your product, for your service, if you can say, you know, this product is this because of this in a matter of a handful of words, that can be a brilliant starting point. Coming back around to the blank page we were talking about earlier, use that as an exercise to get the gears, to get the juice flowing, whatever it needs to be, to then think about how you expand upon that into a full product description, a product page, a blog post, whatever it's going to be.
And it's one of those things as well where a lot of brands try to do it, but get it really wrong. And if you're using words like redefined or supercharged, supercharge your thing or your thing redefined, you've not nailed it.
There's a really bad habit, I think a lot of people, and I literally said this in a conversation with a friend yesterday, talking about a new podcast project we're working on. It was, this is this thing on steroids, or
exactly
this thing on acid, or like insert name of drug you've probably never taken and don't understand here. Like, this is this thing on cocaine. You're like, okay, do you know what that means? Like, and using a thing where you're defining your product by another thing that you're also not defining. Take object A is like object B, but if the reader doesn't have context for object B, they don't know what object A is. So this is an SEO podcast on steroids. I'm like, right, I've never heard an SEO podcast before. So what's a normal one compared to that? How does Search with Candour differ to SERPs Up that differs to all the other ones that are out there? Like, why does that matter? How? That's such a bad habit. I think so many, like you said, the redefine, the supercharge, this is this thing.
There used to be in the late 90s, early 90s, I guess, a brilliant punk fanzine called, but this is back in the days before everything was online. It was a printed fanzine. It used to have that real thin paper and that lovely newsprint smell. You used to pick it up free at gigs, called Fracture. I still got the last issue somewhere because it's very dear to my heart. But they used to do a brilliant thing when describing music in reviews a lot of the time. They would describe it, say something like Jawbreaker playing Twister with the Weaker Thans while Henry Rollins has a beer in the corner. And to somebody outside that circle, it was completely meaningless. Absolute nonsense. But to the people who read Fracture, because to get Fracture, you had to be in, you'd gone to a gig, or you were in like that indie record shop. I used to go to Out of Step in Leeds. You're already in that clique. So you are already part of the audience. So they could use those deep, deep references confidently and knowing it would make sense. And actually, if you didn't know the reference, that was brilliant, because then you had a new band to go look for. And you can still do the same sort of thing, but you really need to understand your audience and you need to know exactly what they're saying, because then you can use those super specific references, and then they feel like you're one of them. You understand them. Supercharged and redefined. Nah. unless again, although to be fair, if you're talking about, a car engine, supercharged, it's a thing. It's an actual physical thing. You could maybe use that. If you're talking about, a band, you could say, they sound like Black Sabbath on acid. That's a valid description.
I'm pretty sure Black Sabbath on acid is Black Sabbath.
It's Black Sabbath, actually. Yeah, that probably wasn't the best. All right. That wasn't the best example. But you kind of get the point, because if you're reading about whatever band it is on whatever website or whatever, you've got that in already. You probably know what acid is or have a concept of it. So that makes sense. If you're a Taylor Swift fan, that it's probably going to be
Taylor Swift on acid. You're like, wait, what?
But that doesn't matter, because you're not the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We're kind of coming back around to what we were talking about earlier with the level of knowledge and the kind of in-speak almost with particular audiences. For me, as a big nerd, I struggled very, very difficultly to not go on a 20-minute tangent talking about Dune just then when you mentioned it, because he's like one of my things, one of my favorites. What, like you're saying, with the deconstruction of the hero's journey and all that kind of stuff. As soon as you start having those kind of nerdy, geeky conversations about a topic, you know that you're invested. There's that intent there already. And I know so many of my clients and so many brands and so many other kind of marketing channels struggle with that very broad approach. I know we begrudgingly mentioned the marketing funnel before we started recording. It's like, oh, you're in that awareness stage kind of thing. when you know somebody is already invested in your thing, maybe not literally invested, but interested and in that kind of crowd and in the audience, when they're at a punk gig, now is the time to give them a punk scene that references other punk bands. Like, oh, I know I've heard of Propaganda, but I don't know who Henry Rollins is. Oh, and then you discover Black Flag. Like, there's all these little
you get a whole new rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I always love. I am totally guilty of this, for want of a better phrase. I wear a lot of graphic T-shirts. As anyone who's ever seen us on YouTube before, I wear them all the time, and they're often references to if you know, you know. If you get it, you'll get it. A lot of that stuff, like I know Mark, our digital marketing director here, my co-host on the show, wears a lot of in-universe referencey kind of stuff. So like we'll wear not an Alien or an Aliens, but a Wayland Yutani T-shirt, for example. Like it's an in-universe company that if you recognize it, you go, oh, I know what Wayland Yutani is. I'm a big fan of Alien or Aliens or, God forbid, 3, 4, etc. No, if you like Alien Resurrection, click off the podcast now. You're wrong. It's terrible. But I think there's that element where that seems like a very nerdy, geeky thing to do. And I know we've talked about comics, we've nerded out about punk and all that kind of stuff throughout this episode. But all this stuff can really help you hook in a specific audience. If you know your client deals with people who are in this industry, who know what they're talking about. A perfect example, an example I bring up a lot, one of my previous clients did a lot of paving and decking stuff for big corporate buildings and projects and things like that. Their target audience is the project managers and the architects who are coordinating this kind of stuff. They are not interested in paving your garden. They are not interested in, working with a B2C kind of thing. This is all B2B stuff. And understanding that audience was so key for me working with them on their products, on their content and all that kind of thing. And okay, you could really have a conversation with somebody who knows what they're talking about. The audience know more than I do coming into this. And I am the one that then has to go off and do the research and understand, like you said, have conversations with the customers, understand what the sales team, what kind of questions are you having with, on an average week, how many questions do you get about this particular bolt or screw or paving deck razor or whatever it is, all this kind of stuff that I didn't even know existed 3 months ago. Now I'm knee deep in the way to do paving and decking so it's on a slanted thing, and I didn't even know that was possible until 2 weeks ago, and then they launched a new product and now I have all this insider knowledge. And that for me, as I said, when I like something, again, ADHD brain, I get deep in there, and to coin a phrase from so many LLMs, and I don't supercharge it, I deep dive and I delve into the topic.
Delve.
But I literally had to I spotted delve into the topic as a thing. I put a bunch of podcast episodes through like AI summary kind of stuff, and it was like everything is Jack and Will talk about this subject, talk about storytelling and copywriting. The duo then delve into the topics, including comics and EAT and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay, everything is a deep dive, everything is a delve, but I'm totally one of those people. Once I care about a subject, or I'm invested in a brand or an industry or whatever it is, or a writer, a novel, whatever it is, I get deep in there and I really, really care about it. And if you can market to people like me, I already have that intent, or I have that investment, right?
I think that curiosity is so important, because when you're working in marketing, whether you're writing or marketing or whatever, a lot of the time it would be easy to write off what you're talking about as boring. And as soon as you do that, you've lost. You're not going to write anything good. But if you delve into it, really go deep and learn about it, there's always something interesting in there. There's always something you can hook into. Wow, that is actually genuinely really interesting. Maybe it's just me, but I always try and find that little nugget of something that I can really get into and find out about. And then suddenly, you have to be careful because you're not an expert on the subject, but you can pretend to be one an awful lot better. I think as well, going back to what we were saying about writing for your audience, when you're on LinkedIn, you see a lot of people will post very top level generic writing advice, which is at best useless, at worst actually quite harmful. And one of the things people will quite often say is don't use jargon in your copy. I think Bethany Joy, who's a brilliant tone of voice person, posted something about this a while ago. It's rubbish. Don't use jargon in your copy that your audience won't understand. But if that audience always uses specific jargon, of course you're going to use the jargon, because otherwise you're going to sound like an idiot trying to talk about their thing coming in from the outside. If you understand the word and the language and the jargon that they're using, then of course you're going to use it, because that brings you in. It makes you part of that circle immediately. They feel like they're reading something by them, not just for them. And that's super important and really powerful. I get quite wound up about some of the crap advice you get on LinkedIn because it's like, what it doesn't, you're not even saying anything. Like, use short sentences. Well, no, because if you just use all short sentences, it's really flipping boring to read. Anyway, I'll calm down. I won't get ranty.
I think that is such a the side we see of so much SEO advice and writing advice and marketing advice in general as well. There's always the exception that proves the rule, right? In general, it probably is pretty good to not use jargon all of the time and just be constantly, every LinkedIn post uses a bunch of like abbreviations and things like that don't actually make sense and all that kind of thing. You can throw in an acronym here or there or whatever. But then when you get to the right audience, that makes a huge difference. And like you said, when you're suddenly not using the correct term in front of the people who are, like I said, in theory, invested and ready to buy your product, work with your brand, buy your service, whatever it is, if you're not talking to those people in a way that makes sense to them and meets them where they are, whether that's literally the platform or the wording that you use, then that could be the difference between a sale and not a sale. Like, I have totally been, again, me being the nerdy, geeky guy that I am, like I said, I get really deep into topics, and as soon as, like, you mentioned Dune earlier, and I know there was a big reaction, and Villeneuve has encountered this, and it's just why he's doing Dune Messiah, the third film, and a big reason of why Frank Herbert did Dune Messiah in the first place. Because most people were like, oh yeah, Paul Atreides, he's the best.
Yeah,
man.
what about us?
What a cool dude. He just started a war, and then he kicked ass. He got the girl, and possibly a second girl. Let's not talk about that. But everything's great, and Paul's brilliant, and he's the true hero. It's like, did you
actually read the book?
Did you pay attention? So even 60 years later, Denis Villeneuve is still dealing with Timothy Chalamet is the hero, Paul Atreides is the hero, right? It's like, the whole point of that story is that it's a deconstruction of the hero's journey. Did you not read the book? Did you not pay attention? And I think so many people encounter that with marketing, right? You see, I know I joked about the unhinged social media stuff from so many brands, and you can tread a very thin line with that kind of stuff. You can drum up the wrong kind of attention in many ways if you get that stuff wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't know, using the example of the few words to get things right, that's a very thin line to tread as well, right? When you can get a misinterpretation or people really not capturing the spirit of that product, that service, that brand, whatever it is.
It's not easy.
If you can do it, it's magic. If you don't, it can go very wrong very quickly.
I think there's a bit of a misconception, a bit like, similar to how people sometimes feel about modern art, is that it's only a couple of words. I could have done that.
It's just a bunch
you
of
could
splodges.
probably write down the 2 words. Yeah, I'll give you that. But the process, the reasoning behind that is a lot more than just 2 words. You could write down any 2 words, dead easy. You could probably even spell them right. But to get the same level of power behind that, now that's hard.
Absolutely. I think that's a very nice little endpoint for us to wrap up on. And if people do want to follow you, Will, want to follow you on LinkedIn, follow what you're up to in terms of writing, photography, all that good stuff, what perhaps 2 or 3 words can they type into their search engine or social media platform of choice to find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram as Clean Slate Will. My LinkedIn is there are a lot of stories about my cat Mango. People seem to enjoy them, and I do talk about storytelling and writing on there as well. Instagram, I actually have two Instagrams. If you also search for Car Parks Hull, that's the second one. It's photographs of car parks in Hull, and I promise you, it's a lot more interesting than it sounds.
That is the three words. It's like you're either really into this or that sounds like the dullest thing in the world. It's like, actually, no, it's photography. It's like interesting photography. It's not just like data about car parks in Hull.
Do you know what? It's one of those funny things. I say it to people and they're like, and then I show them the Instagram. I'm like, oh, that is actually quite cool.
If you can go from to then that's the perfect marketing.
Something's going right?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Well, it's been a pleasure nerding out about various forms of storytelling and copywriting, for everything from Dune to punk zines and everything in between. And we talked about marketing along the way as well.
A little bit, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Will.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute joy.
And that wraps up this week's episode of Search with Candour. Thank you so much for watching or listening, wherever you're watching or listening. You made this stuff possible. We have bought extra equipment for, like I said, the very cool episode that is coming out in a couple of weeks' time. It was an in-studio, multi-person recording. It was a lot of work, but I think you're going to really, really love it. It's one of the best episodes I think we've ever done. And a huge thank you to Will Slater for joining me. I think Will is one of my favorite people I've had on the podcast as well, because we just got to nerd out about stuff. There were so many times I wanted to deep dive and go down a rabbit hole of what Will was talking about, but I had to really restrain myself. And I feel like Will and I could have talked for hours and hours and hours about storytelling, about writing, about fiction, all that fun stuff. Like I said, links for everything to follow will be in the show notes. Links for our sponsors, links to follow us and subscribe and all that kind of stuff are down below. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be doing some amazing work coming through in 2025. We've got big plans for Search with Candour, big plans for Search Norwich as well coming up in 2025. So stay tuned to all of our social media and all of our usual places to basically keep up to date with all the cool plans Mark and I have got for 2025. Until then, I will see you next week and have a lovely week.